Is she speaking? I don't hear anything right now.
I can see you, Erin, but I can't hear you. Ooh. So we know where she is. I still can't hear you. That's weird. It doesn't show that she's muted. Anybody, any ideas? No.
Maybe she has like the microphone on her computer, or is she on her phone? She's on her phone, right?
And she's not muted. Anybody, any ideas? Try again. Linda Shockley just joined us. Good morning, Linda Shockley.
Hi, Linda.
We're trying to work out some technical details with Erin. She's on the scene in Minneapolis and was broadcasting from her phone. We weren't able to get audio. Now she's calling.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yay!
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
good. But you can't see me now, right?
correct.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties in a riot zone. So as you saw, I am in Minneapolis, where protesters last night burned down a chunk of a neighborhood right outside the 3rd precinct. So this is unfortunately usually what my assignments look like, technical difficulties and all. And so, a little unusual. I don't normally talk to college students in the middle of reporting, but let's just do a back and forth and somebody help prompt me and ask me questions. I mean, this kind of reporting is often it's often difficult. You're often talking to people who are traumatized and not sure they want to speak with you. It's often logistically challenging, and of course, there are many safety risks. So I'm happy to answer as many questions about that as you like, but let's maybe start with a question or two.
Well, I'll start off, and while everybody else is thinking of their question, because we just looked at the coverage in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune versus the Los Angeles Times, where we have a student interning, and obviously it led the front page in the Star-Tribune, but it wasn't even on the front page of the Los Angeles Times. In your opinion, is this a national story?
I think it is quickly becoming a national story. I mean, I wouldn't be here otherwise. Like, the Journal, would not necessarily send me to every single event, right? So the fact that I am here, standing on the ground, watching an apartment, what was supposed to be an apartment building, it was under construction, burn. I mean, its roof is on fire. Yeah, I think it's a national story. Now, obviously, newspapers, and other outlets make news judgments all the time about what their readers, listeners, viewers want to read and see and know about. I mean, it's not like the Los Angeles Times didn't write about it. They just placed it differently, right? Gave it a different emphasis than the Minneapolis paper. Just as the Journal is going to give it a different emphasis, in terms of placement and prominence. So it's all calculation.
When you kind of parachute into sort of like a war zone like that, where do you even start?
Identify yourself. That was Mark Grabowski, who's one of our instructors here.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi, Mark. So yesterday, I started simply by going to where George Floyd and police had their interaction, where that video that we all saw with the officer kneeling on George Floyd's neck was taken. That was the Cup Foods. And it's often good to start at the sort of epicenter place if you can get there. I knew people were likely to be out there, that there was likely to be some sort of memorial pop-up / protest. And so I just began there and went and saw what was happening, talked to people. They told me, and I knew a little bit that the 3rd precinct had drawn other protesters, had become sort of a flashpoint place. So that was my next stop. And at each place, you just, you learn a little bit more. People in the community tell you a little bit more, and they sort of act as your guide, around town, where to go, what to do, who to talk to. At a certain point, I got, led to people who knew George Floyd. He liked to go by Floyd, so I might just call him Floyd. But, people led me to those who knew him. And, so that's always what you're trying to find is what can I tell you about the people who matter the most in this. In that case, that's George Floyd and the 4 officers, particularly former officer, I'm not quite sure how to say his last name, but Chauvin, I think. So yeah, that's generally, just pick a place. And I knew before I got here that it was either going to be Cup Foods or the 3rd precinct, I think. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who's next?
Somebody chime in.
Hi, this is Sam Nelson. I had a question about what are some ways that you interview people who maybe have been traumatized or emotions are really running high, and maybe you're not part of that community, like you said, you're coming in. How do you establish that trust and interview people respectfully and with sensitivity? Yeah.
I think, you've got to like mentally get yourself in the headspace of like, okay, I'm going into a place of trauma. Like, let me make sure that I push my empathy to the forefront. And I constantly repeat the words empathy. You really need to approach people kind of softly and with a lot of patience. I generally don't, I haven't taken my notepad out yet today. I don't generally walk up to people in a situation like this with my notepad out or a camera out or a microphone out. The first thing I want to do is approach them, introduce myself, not shove a camera or a notepad in their face and start peppering them with questions. And so I'll walk up, I'll say, hey, I'm Erin, here's who I am. Would you mind talking to me? And usually their response will help tell you what their frame of mind is, whether they're even in an emotional place where they can do that. Because sometimes people can't. And also by doing that, I'm asking permission. I'm getting their consent. And in a lot of these situations, people have had control and consent ripped from them. So by asking to talk to them instead of just wandering up and immediately starting, you start to gain that consent. And I repeatedly ask them throughout the conversation, is this okay? Are you feeling okay? Do you need to stop? I remind them that a conversation is a two-way street. So I can ask a question. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to answer it. Or if they think I'm not asking the right questions, they can tell me and help guide the conversation where they think it needs to go. And that gives them agency, in the discussion. So again, another measure of control for people who have had it taken away.
Hi, I have a question. This is Megan Waring. Whenever you're covering these type of stories, how do you keep yourself from having all that get to you? Whenever you're trying to empathize with people and you meet people in another community, how does that not take over you? I
think you have to absorb some of it, because if you can't or don't, yeah, for me, I have to absorb some of it because I can't otherwise put it back out there on the page in one of my stories. But you've got to take breaks. Number one, you've got to remember that feeling the feels does not mean that you have to like join the crowd or join the movement. Like I constantly remind myself, I get to go home at the end of the night. I get to, or at least back to a hotel, right? I get to remove myself from this situation. Some of these people, this is where people live. And so, but by reminding myself that, it sort of helps give me a little bit of at least mental space. And I think you've got to be good at carving out some mental space for yourself and recognizing that, okay, if things are getting to you, like last night, honestly, watching people set AutoZone on fire, watching them break the windows of Target and start looting it, that was really tough, and it caused some tears to form. But like, you got to pull yourself together. And so like, I mentally took a step back. I took a deep breath, couple deep breaths. Those are calming. And I found a friend. Thankfully, I have a reporter friend in Minneapolis, and we found each other in the crowd and, kept each other safe and talked it out a little bit when we had a moment here or there. And that's how you do it. If you have more time, you do something to take yourself away from the reporting and give yourself a break. I like to go running. Not that I do a lot of that in the pandemic, but I like to go running. I also, I love to cook. I reach out all the time to friends and colleagues and tell them, here's how I'm feeling. This is what I'm hearing and seeing. And sometimes it's scary and sometimes it's a lot, but just honestly being able to tell somebody else about it helps. So, yeah. Use all your, phone a friend, ask an expert, all the things.
Okay, thank you.
Use all your lifelines, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't bring it up, and I don't currently have one, but I am a big proponent of having a psychologist too, who can help you sort of afterwards synthesize everything and let it go. I had a really good one in Boston. Didn't ever find one in Houston, and I'm on the search right now in Chicago. So it's not always easy to find a mental health professional who handles secondary PTSD specific to trauma reporting for journalists.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can hear me. My name's Jordan. I was just wondering if the Wall Street Journal helps you with any of your mental health support.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We have the standard employee assistance program that I think a lot of workplaces do. But we also literally have a psychologist on call that I could ring into. Haven't done it yet, I will admit, because I found out about the resource, I think, in September. And, this is my beat. So I don't often get super overwhelmed. But the resource is there if I need it. And then we also do several months ago, the Journal brought in the DART Center to do a training with us and to just talk about PTSD. And honestly, they're constantly checking in with me because I do have one of the sort of more emotionally taxing jobs to just, see how I'm doing and what I'm thinking and if I have any ideas on how else they can help. So I think the Journal is really supportive. And outside of that, so is honestly the disaster reporter sort of network. Especially working on the national circuit, we all, there's always at least one or two journalists I know at every disaster I go to.
I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
My name is Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
How did you become the Wall Street Journal's like go-to reporter for reporting on disasters? Is it like an official job title?
Is it an official job? I mean, they made the job for me.
Okay.
So I was an energy reporter for 10 years at the Boston Globe first and then at the Journal. But I always sort of volunteered for a lot of these assignments. When I started my career, I was a metro reporter. I covered cities and a lot of like crime and life safety services. And I really gravitate toward that. And I'd sort of fallen into the energy beat. And like I said, I did it for 10 years. I mean, I was a solid energy reporter, but like, it wasn't the thing that like really got me going, really like was like my passion for journalism, but disasters kind of are. And my energy editor recognized that. And so when events would happen I was living in Houston at the time, he would say, the U.S. news team, which handles this kind of coverage, they need help. Are you up for it? And so he would sort of lend me out. And 2017, I ended up on a ton of disasters all in a row because I lived in Houston, so I covered Harvey. I've covered like more than a dozen hurricanes at this point, including Katrina. And so Katrina, Harvey, Dorian, Florence. I mean, I could name a ton of them. And so I did Harvey and Irma back to back. And then, the Journal was like, you can't do Maria because you need some R&R. So go take a break. And I went home. I'm from California, and my mom and sister live in Sonoma County. And I went home in October 2017, which is when the Wine Valley fires broke out, and they burned part of my mom and sister's town, and I was there when it happened. And then I came home to Houston, and the next month there was a mass shooting outside of San Antonio, and I ended up on that. So all of that to say, like, 2017 just sort of crystallized for everyone that I was constantly on disasters. And after a decade on energy, when I asked if I could maybe make a beat change, this seemed like the natural step. And so, like, the Journal had people who obviously come to these events and cover them, but they really, they formalized it into a beat for me. And so it is actually my job title.
Thank you.
So, if I could jump in and ask a question.
Sure.
What kind of a go bag do you maintain in your car at your home so that you can, at the drop of, in a split second, head for the airport or head for the car and take off?
Yeah, so I have this stuff written out in a list, although I don't really need the list for myself anymore. And the list is broken down into here's what you need for specific types of disasters. But in general, so I've got a go box both in my house and one in my car. I have a couple of different size small like carry-on cases because I never trust the airlines not to lose my expensive gear, and you really don't want to land in a disaster zone and have to try and buy something. Although, you can usually source some stuff, but there's some specialty things like there'd be no way if the airlines lost my firefighter gear to replace it on the fly. It's special order. But what do I keep? Well, before I get into the specialty stuff, let's just talk about what you should travel with, period, whether you're going to a disaster or not, because you never know when something's going to happen. You should always have your credentials on you, a stash of cards, a notepad or other note-taking implement, your cell phones, your laptop, and your chargers. Bare minimum. I also like to carry a USB port because you never know when someone might need to give you a digital file, which has happened to me several times. So that's bare minimum. that's what I had on me when the wine country fires broke out, because I had gone there for a wedding, to a friend's wedding, and to visit my mom and sister. And so all I had, supposed to be a 2-day trip, I had the dress I wore to the wedding, a pair of fancy cowboy boots, and a pair of jeans. And I ended up borrowing clothes from my sister, getting the rest of what I needed at Target, and calling the rental car company and telling them I didn't know when I was going to return their vehicle. So that's bare minimum. For various disasters, you do need to know what your specialty gear is. You don't want to walk into a hurricane without some waterproof pants and a rain jacket. You probably want a dry bag, which is a special bag that divers usually carry, to keep your gear in so that your electronics don't get wet. You need to know how you're going to take your notes, because if you usually take them on paper, I can tell you in a driving rain, that's not going to work. And, always carry a hotspot, because you never know when you might need power. For fires, it's the firefighter gear. I don't go onto a fire line without my Nomex, which is the fireproof stuff that firefighters wear. If I'm going onto an active fire line, I've got it's called a hot shield. It's basically the N95 with a special face covering, plus my fire helmet, my fire boots, my fire gloves, and all of that. I mean, I basically look like a firefighter. For basic Midwest flooding, a really good pair of rubber boots. And in a hurricane too, also rubber boots, and steel-toed, because you never know what kind of debris is under the water that I guarantee you're going to walk through. And you got to recognize, your gear is not going to keep you dry. It's just going to keep you not wet for a little while. Yeah. It'll lessen the amount of time that you're physically miserable. How about that?
Yeah. How about
yeah.
But another little add-on, but we're also accustomed to using plastic. Do you also carry some cash with you?
I have cash in my wallet right now. I use plastic as much as possible, but I always roll with a little bit of cash. Also, baby wipes, because power is often out where I go, and sometimes so is water. So you never know when you might not be able to take a shower and need a baby wipe instead. Sunscreen, bug spray, all that kind of stuff. Basic first aid kit. For the polar vortex, you better make sure that you know how to dress warmly, because when it's cold enough that it'll freeze the car, you don't want to be outside for very long without the proper layers. So in the polar vortex, I had on 3 pairs of pants and 6 top layers, I think. And I had gone to REI to help, so that they could help show me how to sort of layer what I needed to keep me the warmest.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure.
It's Megan. Since you cover a lot of hard stuff, but what is your favorite part about your job?
I mean, listen, the grace that is required of people who talk to you in these moments, that is always humbling. And when you get someone to open up and tell you a story, you just know, and it's such a satisfying moment when everything sort of comes together. I mean, remember, at the point that those things come together, you've probably waded through a crap ton of logistics, maybe driven through a hurricane or spent the night in a riot, and you haven't showered, you haven't slept, and then the right person opens up and just talks to you, and it's amazing. It's every single time. And like I said, the grace that is required of people when they do that, I don't even know how they do sometimes. So I don't know why they do, but I'm grateful for it every single time.
All right, thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
You already talked about.
Tell her who you are.
My name's MK Lovell.
Hello.
But you've already talked about how you don't get involved while you're on scene. do you have any difficulties when you're kind of away from the events that you are covering, not participating like on
I
social
don't.
media?
Period. I do not participate as anything but a journalist, and I don't believe you should, and I believe most outlets would ask you not to. Like think about it in terms of political stuff. Unless I am assigned, I do not go to like the Women's March. I am not an activist. I am a journalist first and foremost. And I don't believe that you should be personally participating in the things that you are covering. Like, what if I put down my notepad and started throwing rocks at the police department? How does that affect my legitimacy? I can't do that. You know? No matter what I feel personally, I've got to be as impartial as I can. I've got to try and understand, you know, all of the major legitimate perspectives that I can and report back. I mean, that's what people are trusting when I'm out here. And so if I was out as a participant, as an activist, I just don't think my stories would have the same strength that they do. And honestly, that's what keeps me from participating. Like, you know, you might feel like I want to be a civic participant. Well, journalism is how I'm a civic participant. It's how I affect change in my communities.
So Erin, can you try the video again?
Can I try the video again? I will try the video again. Hang on. We're testing my capabilities here.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about what we're seeing.
Okay. I can't hear you while I do this.
Oh, here.
So behind me, if you can hear me, that's the precinct right there behind my head. That's the auto zone that was burned out. Right there. And I'm sort of on a side street right now, on East Lake and South 27th. And so you've got, like, I think that's a water truck right there. And you've got utility trucks. I saw firefighters out earlier. The police are definitely staged right outside the precinct. And there was already a guy with a bullhorn this morning who was just repeating the phrase, "They're gonna kill me, I can't breathe." So I'm gonna walk down the street here and just show you some of the shattered windows and the glass. All right, so now I'm going to turn off the video and put this thing back to my ear for a second. All right, can you hear me again?
Absolutely. So.
All right, did you get much of that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
What stands out with all of that right now, this morning, what's standing out?
I mean, just the breadth of the destruction. You know, and I was out here until like I had definitely past midnight, maybe 1 a.m. And, you know, I saw it as it was happening, but under cover of dark, like you can't see all of the details necessarily. Like you can hear them and you can see certain things, but in like the light of this morning, I mean, just people right now are literally walking through, some in flip-flops, through just shattered glass, so many broken windows. There are jugs of milk that protesters use when they get tear gassed. They pour it into their face. There are abandoned jugs of milk everywhere. It smells like fire has a different smell based on what's burning, and industrial fire has this kind of like chemical smell. So there's this chemical smell and this haze in the air, and like there's all this noise too because you've got utility trucks going, you've got fire alarms going off. I'm looking at a building right now where it's fire sprinklers are still spraying the interior of the building. And you've got like looky-loos literally everywhere because especially the people who live in this neighborhood. I mean, imagine that you live here and that you're at home hearing all of this stuff happening. I mean, I talked to some residents last night who, one lady was sitting outside her apartment complex in her car because she was like, I'm not sure if they're going to try and get into our building. And that her building is right on the edge of the Target that got looted. And she's like, if I need to leave, I want to be able to leave quickly. I can't sleep. So, and everything that's not broken and some of the stuff that is also just has graffiti all over it. So, it's sad. It's really sad. And I think people are in shock.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Jordan again. I was just wondering if you have any advice for young journalists who want to be where you are someday.
I mean, raise your hand, number one. You're talking to me and I clearly love what I do, but not everyone loves this coverage. So, you wouldn't be surprised to note that not a lot of people were chomping at the bit to get assigned to a riot. So one, if you think you want to do this, raise your hand. Ask to tag along with someone. You should always, before you go on an assignment like this, be talking to someone who has covered it before and asking them what to do. If your outlet has a security officer, you need to be talking about a safety plan. Last night, I had to check in with our security officers to let them know where I was every few hours and to let them know when I was safely back at the hotel. And at a certain part of the night, they sent me an alert saying, "Hey, Erin, we know you're still out there. The governor is recommending that it's too unstable and you should leave, so maybe start to think about leaving now." And if you don't have a security officer, you at the very least need to be doing that with your editor. So I really think in some ways it's as simplistic as saying, I want to try this, but doing it in a smart way where you're going in with as much knowledge about what you might encounter as possible. Because you have to remember that when you are on a disaster assignment, it's not just about your reporting. A lot of it is logistics and troubleshooting and knowing what to do when shit goes wrong, because shit always goes wrong. Excuse my language. But there will always be some breakdown, some challenge, and you've got to figure out how to overcome it to get your story done.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I was wondering if you could talk about a time when something did go wrong and how you handled it.
No, I didn't quite get that. It was a little bit echoey.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could talk about a time where something went wrong and how you handled it.
I mean, literally every assignment. Gosh, I mean, sometimes in Hurricane Dorian, when I went to Abaco Island, which was completely destroyed, it didn't have water or power. And it wasn't like hotels were open. So, I mean, the first challenge was, figuring out how to get on the island, figuring out if there was someone or some place that we could safely stay, and then figuring out what to do about the power situation. And the power situation was off and on. And so, you know, like very often the challenge is like, I have no cell phone signal, I have no internet. How the hell do I file this story and you know, get it to my editors? And sometimes you can fix that and sometimes you can't. And so you have to have contingency plans where, like, you know, you think, okay, I will have internet here, but then, you know, you're in a disaster zone and the internet is spotty, so it goes out. And do you have a backup? Sometimes you don't, and sometimes you do, and you've got to roll with that. I mean, the other thing is, again, you're dealing with traumatized people, so interviews fall through all the time. People say they're going to talk to you, say they'll meet up with you, and then they ghost you. And so you've got to be able to pivot very quickly, and deal with that. I don't think, like, I'm trying to think. I've never had, knock on wood, I've never had like a vehicle issue yet. I mean, oh no, that's not true. One time I got my car stuck in the mud covering a hurricane and had to come get towed and like had to like wait for AAA. But you just, you know, you kind of just deal with that stuff, and, you know, you have to know what you can handle and what you can't, and be really good about telling that to your editors, and sometimes telling them, no, that's not going to work, or here's how to do something differently. Like my editor on this assignment, she's newly appointed as an editor. She was a fantastic reporter, but she's learning how to do disaster coverage literally in the heat of the moment. And so a couple of times she's been like, I want you to do this. And I've had to tell her, no, that won't work, but here's what I'm going to do instead. Don't just say no. Always have a backup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right, Erin, I'll give you the closing remarks here. What do you want? What other words of wisdom do you have for them?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know. Right now my brain is fried. I got like a few hours of sleep. You know what? I'll leave you with this. With two things that were told to me. One by a mass shooting survivor in Sutherland Springs, Tommy Barker. And she emailed me a couple of days after I talked to her just to tell me, like, thank you for, you know, letting her cry it out and being nice. And she signed her email with the phrase, keep your heart ahead of your head. And I always remember that. So, you know, try and keep my empathy and my humanity at the forefront of what I do, because every person that I write about is just that, a person, a human being with thoughts and feelings, whatever they are, and whether I agree with them or not. So that's one. And then two is something that Tammy Audi, who is now the Page One editor, told me when she was the West Coast bureau chief and overseeing my reporting as I reported on the October 2017 wildfires, which she knew was hitting me hard because it was literally like in my mom and sister's hometown. So I'm, you know, driving streets that I know because I go visit my mom and sister, and like, you know, the fire came like within feet of burning down the hospital where my niece was born, and the mall that my deceased brother-in-law helped build, you know, all of these things. And she also knew that I had been on hurricane coverage back to back right before that. And so she called me up. I was in a car with my sister. We were driving around town trying to see what we could see. And she said, listen, Erin, you've been on high alert for a while now. And, you know, what you think your threshold is for handling everything is you know, maybe falsely high. And so whatever you're thinking about doing, take 10 steps back and do that instead. And like that reminder that a little bit of caution never hurts was just so, you know, so key in that moment. And I think about it all the time.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Virtual applause. I know you can't see it.
Thank you. And thank
I-
you for dealing with me and the craziness that is my life.
I too have covered many disasters, and I have empathy for you. And I will leave you with be safe and be careful, and we will talk on email.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Be safe, guys.
Thank you.
Be
Bye.
safe.
Thank you, Erin. Be safe.
Will do. Bye.
And to my group, I'll see you back on Zoom